slide 2, which goes back a little more than 30 years, and look at the top 20 from 1989. And if you look at the top 20 from 1989, there's two things that should grab your interest. None of the 20 from 30 years ago are on the present list. None. Zero. There were then 6 U.S. companies on the list, and their names are familiar to you. We have General Electric, we have Exxon, we have IBM Corp. I mean, they're still around. Merck is down there at number. None made it to the list 30 years later, zero. And I would guess that very few of you, when I asked you to play the quiz a few minutes ago, would have put down zero. And I don't think it will be zero. But it is a reminder of what extraordinary things can happen, things that seem obvious to you. Japan had this wonderful bull market for a very long time, so you had a number of Japanese companies on the list. Today, there are none. And the United States had the 6. Now we have 13. But they aren't the same 6. I would invite you to think about one other thing as you look at this list. 1989 was not the Dark Ages. I mean, we weren't just discovering capitalism or anything else. And people thought they knew a lot about the stock market, and the efficient market theory was in, and it was not a backward time. And if you look, the top company at that time had a market value of $104 billion. So the largest company in the world, Tidal, in just a shade over 30 years, has gone from $100 billion to $2 trillion. At the bottom, the number 20 has gone from $34 billion to something a little over 10 times that. That tells you something about what's happened with equality, which is a hot subject in this country. It tells you a little bit about inflation, but this was not a highly inflationary period as a whole. But it tells you that capitalism has worked incredibly well, especially for the capitalists. And it's a pretty astounding number. Do you think it could be repeated now that 30 years from now that you could take $2 trillion for Apple and multiply any company and come up with 30 times that for the leader? You know, it seems impossible, and maybe it is impossible. But we were just as sure of ourselves as investors and Wall Street was in 1989 as we are today. But the world can change in very, very dramatic ways. And I'll just give you one other example you might ponder. This is when you start feeling too sure of yourself. One thing it shows, incidentally, is that it's a great argument for index funds, is that the main thing to do was to be aboard the ship, a ship. They were all going to a better promised land. You just didn't know which one was the one they'd necessarily get on. But you couldn't help but do well if you just had a diversified group of equities. U.S. equities would be my preference, but to hold over a 30-year period. But if you thought you knew a lot about which ones to pick, or the person that you had hiring, you were paying a lot of money to, had all these ideas, they could tell you their best ideas in 1989 did not necessarily do that well, although overall equities were absolutely the place to be. Secondly, people get enormously attracted to various industries. I mean, they think if you know, if a company says it's in the XYZ industry and that's a popular one, you can sell IPOs, you can sell SPACs, people disregard sales numbers, earnings numbers. It's just, it's the place to be. So Berkshire Hathaway, where was the place to be in 1903 when my dad was born in 1903? But that wasn't really that big of news. But and it wasn't big news that actually Henry Ford was starting the Ford Motor Company. He'd failed a couple of times before, but he was about to change the world. I mean, the auto, when you think about everything, we've got a great auto insurance company. If there weren't any autos, we wouldn't have Geico. But it transformed the country. And Henry Ford brought in the $5 daily wage, and that was a huge thing. Assembly lines, everything, autos. came along. So let's just assume that you had seen a quick glance back in 1903 of all the interstate highways, 290 million vehicles on the road in the United States. You know, everything about it. And you said, well, this is pretty easy. It's going to be cars. It's going to be autos. Berkshire, by accident, well, we own a company called Marmon. We bought it from the Pritzker family some years ago. The Pritzkers had built this business from many, many, many companies that they'd acquired. And the name of their company was Marmon. And I don't know exactly why Jay and Bob decided to name it Marmon, but they owned this company Marmon, which in 1911 had been the company whose car won the first Indianapolis 500. Maybe that's why they called it Marmon. They were proud of the fact that the company in 1911 won the first Indianapolis 500. It also was the company that invented the rearview mirror. I'm not sure whether that was a big contribution to society, and certainly around your household. Rearview mirror, you don't want to emphasize too much, but they the car that was entered in the Indianapolis 500, the guy who normally sat next to the driver and looked backwards to tell what the competitors were doing, he was sick, so they invented the rear view mirror. So let's just assume that you decided that autos were this incredible thing, and someday there'd be an Indianapolis 500, and someday they'd have rear view mirrors on cars, and someday 290 million cars would be buzzing around the United States, or autos, or the county trucks there. And so I decided to look at the history, and I thought I'd put up the list of auto companies